Well, good to see our group here tonight. This is Patrick Hayes. I'm one of the ministers at Redeeming Life Ministries Church here in Stanton, Virginia. We have this Bible study on Wednesday nights, and we're going through the book of Amos. It's been going slow. I promise to speed it up some, but we've got Amos in these kinds of little poems of rebuke. He begins them with, and I'm repeating this once again, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, yea, for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. And then he'll talk about what God is angry about with Syria and Damascus. And then he'll go to another country. So, he's done this coming all the way through chapter 1, most of chapter 2. And last week we looked at verse 4 of chapter 2. He uses the same poetic form. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. And he takes the rest of the verse to explain why, and then says what he intends to do to Judah. Now, this is Amos writing this. If we go back to chapter 1, verse 1, just notice once again who this Amos is. He says, the words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, which coincided with the days of Jeroboam the second, the son of Joash, king of Israel. And he takes it down to 2 years before the earthquake. So there was a current event that everybody at the time knew about. And Amos seems to be prophesying to both northern Israel and to Judah in the south, and to all these other nations that are round about. And he's angry. I mean, we don't find anything happy in Amos's writings so far. And now he is turning in verse 6 of chapter 2, he is turning to northern Israel. Now let me say, if I am correct in my assumption that Amos is the father of the prophet Isaiah, and I really only have one thing to hook that on, and it's that Isaiah calls himself the son of Amos, A-M-O-Z. But the time fits also. And what we're about to read tonight, the destruction of northern Israel, will occur in the days of Isaiah, a generation after Amos's time, when Isaiah becomes probably the chief counselor to King Uzziah's great-grandson Hezekiah. And Isaiah is there when northern Israel is destroyed, those 10 tribes, by the Assyrians. Isaiah is there in Judah. He has also prophesied to Hezekiah, you're going to see all this happen. Amos had prophesied it would happen. And they're there to observe from a distance how this happens. 10 years later, the Assyrians return. Hezekiah will still be on the throne. Isaiah will still be there with him. And they will besiege the city of Jerusalem. And maybe one of the top 3 divine interventions in military battle will occur at that time, when the angel of the Lord will descend in one night and destroy all of the Assyrian soldiers. Close to 200,000 of them, in fact, in one night. We'll talk about that when we get to Isaiah. He gives a few chapters describing, in the middle of Isaiah, just describing his dealings with King Hezekiah and all of this coming. But a generation earlier, we've got Amos talking about God's anger against Israel. Verse 6, thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and yea, for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver. They sold the poor for a pair of shoes. I read this last week. We'll discuss what it means. They pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor. They turn aside the way of the meek. A man and his father will go into the same maid, sexual relations with the same woman or prostitute. I mean, the word maid is used there, which is synonymous sometimes with the word virgin. This is grotesque to even be describing it. And thereby they profane my holy name, God says. They lay themselves down upon clothes laid to pledge by every kind of altar. They drink the wine of the condemned in the houses of their gods. And then God begins to bring up his personal complaints in verse 9. But let me just back up a little bit and kind of overlap with where I was last week as we were finishing out the hour. Northern Israel went, shall we say, completely, officially bad as soon as Solomon died. They chose Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, to be their king, and they rebelled against the house of David. They basically said 3 things. We 10 tribes will never again serve under a king descended from the house of David. Number 2, we will never again go to that city of Jerusalem that David built or worship in that temple that his son Solomon built. We'll never do that again. Number 3, we will never worship the God of Abraham again. And they choose under Jeroboam. Now let me explain the evil genius of this. And you can read this beginning with 1 Kings chapter 12 through about chapter 14, the story of Jeroboam's evil workings. At the end of Solomon's death in 1 Kings chapter 11, just before Solomon's death, Solomon found out what Jeroboam was up to. Jeroboam had been one of Solomon's administrators up there in Ephraim and Manasseh. And he was called a valiant man, a man of valor, rather. And he was important among the Josephine tribes. That's, the sons of Joseph back in Genesis were Ephraim and Manasseh. So now there's these tribes. Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, that's from Joseph. And Joshua had been from the tribe of Ephraim, and so it had gained some importance. On Jacob's deathbed, he had prophesied about Joseph's sons, that they could have the rule, over the everlasting hills and all of this. But of course, all of those were if-then statements, if they will obey, and so forth. The other son of Joseph was Manasseh. At the end of Moses' life, Manasseh had split into 2 parts. There's East Manasseh across the River Jordan and West Manasseh on the west of the River Jordan. So they became 3 tribes known as the Josephine tribes. In the tribe of Manasseh was the city of Shechem. And I won't go back into its history. I've already talked about it some in these nights, but some of the worst things to occur in ancient times seemed to have occurred around Shechem. And yet Shechem had been made the capital because the Josephine tribes under Joshua ruled the rest of the country. But there was another capital, and it was called Shiloh, and it was in Ephraim. Shechem and Shiloh were about 10 miles apart, but Shiloh was the religious capital. That's where Joshua and the high priests set up the tabernacle at Shiloh, and it would remain there for about 450 years at Shiloh. So it was a kind of a two-city system. You had civil government coming out of Shechem, and you had religious government coming out of Shiloh. Kind of a separation of church and state, if you want to think about it that way. But that all fell apart. Eventually, Samuel was there at Shiloh. That's where he kept the tabernacle tent and so forth. But Samuel anointed a man from the tribe of Benjamin to be king. And this was Saul, the son of Kish. You read about this in 1 Samuel. And he anointed him to be the first king. Saul started out good for the first couple of years, and then Samuel rebuked him because Saul not only wanted to be king, but also priest. And he acted as priest on one occasion. Samuel showed up and said, for that, God is taking the kingdom away from you. Your sons will not be kings after you. And it's the idea God had wanted church and state to be somewhat separated. I don't mean to use that in American political terms, but it's kind of what it had been. You know, the church was at Shiloh, the civil government was at Shechem. Saul wants to bring both of those powers together into one city, his hometown of Gibeah. And God says, for this is unforgivable. Your kingdom will not continue. And Saul gets angry at the priesthood. Apparently, and there's much written about this in extra-biblical writings, apparently Saul wanted to wage an all-out attack on the priesthood. Saul did not want a religion. If he's going to be king and he can't be in charge of the religion, then he doesn't want a religion at all. And he murders priests and attacks them. It seems like the Gibeonites, not Gibeah, but Gibeon. This is, I talked about it before. The Gibeonites are the tribe of Canaanite people who made a covenant with Joshua way back when, and Joshua proclaimed mercy upon them, and they became servants to the priesthood. The hewers of wood and bearers of water for the house of God. And these Gibeonites remained faithful. We're also told that they were valiant men and mighty in causes of battle. But they're there as servants to the Israelite priesthood. Seems that the Gibeonites took down the tabernacle at Shiloh because Saul was threatening to have it destroyed. And they moved it up to a mountain area known as Nob, N-O-B. And they set parts of it up. Doesn't look like they set up the whole tabernacle, but they must have had the tent folded up or something. They were hiding it from Saul and his men. They did have there, the high priest was there at Nob on this particular day when David came by with his men, and the high priest gave David the sword of Goliath. that David apparently previously had dedicated to the tabernacle. And David says, oh, there's none like that. Let me have that. And David had used it before to cut off the giant Goliath's head. And now the high priest gives it to him. And David says also, and Jesus quotes from this in the Gospels, David said, high priest, Ahimelech was the high priest's name. Do you have any food we can eat? And the high priest says, all we have is the showbread that we Levites bake every day to present before the Lord. David said, give us that. And even Jesus refers to this, and David went into the holy place. Now, we don't know if only the holy place, the sanctum sanctorum, was standing, or the whole tabernacle around it. But David went in, and they who were with him, and they did eat of the holy bread. Jesus made a reference to that, saying, all of you are welcome to come into the holy place of the kingdom of God. But, David left. Saul and his men showed up afterwards, and they murdered the priest for abetting and helping David and his men. But they didn't destroy the tabernacle. Why not? I'm guessing because the men of Gibeon learned that Saul was coming and would destroy these holy things. And they packed them up a second time. And where did they take them? Well, surprising, we read that the tabernacle gets set up on their mountain. The tabernacle is set up on Mount Gibeon. And it remains there for about 90 years. Throughout the rest of the reign of Saul, throughout the reign of David, and 16 years into the reign of Solomon. Even all those years later, when Solomon is a young king and he wants to sacrifice before the Lord and pray for wisdom, he goes to the tabernacle at Mount Gibeon to do so. The Gibeonites have protected this tabernacle from King Saul. And it remained there until Solomon got the temple built. Now, when I explain these things, somebody will often ask me, well, doesn't it say that David brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem? Wasn't the tabernacle there in Jerusalem? The answer is absolutely not. The Bible plainly says in the Chronicles version that David put up a special tent for the tabernacle to be put in Jerusalem. Not the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant was put in a special tent in Jerusalem until the temple could be built under, 24 years into the reign of King Solomon, the temple is finally dedicated, and they bring the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. All those years, the tabernacle itself had sat on top of Mount Gibeon, protected by the Gibeonites. So there's a long history of concerted effort to protect Moses' old tabernacle. What happens to it? We can only suppose. There are different theories that once Solomon gets the temple built, none of the tabernacle furniture except the Ark of the Covenant is necessary. The table of showbread, Solomon's got a new one built, 10 times bigger than the old one. The laver where the priests would wash their hands, now it's a gigantic bowl of metal supported on the backs of statuary bulls or oxen in the new temple. As far as the candlestick, we don't read of it again except that the new temple is lit by candles all over the place, not just the one single menorah, and so forth with the tabernacle, the temple furniture. Even the holiest of holies now has not just the Ark of the Covenant with two little angels in statuary facing one another, but some gigantic angels over the entrance of the holiest of holies, stretching their wings out. Solomon made it all immensely bigger. What happened to the old tabernacle tent? Well, it's hundreds of years old, but it's considered sacred. Solomon probably has it all folded up, and all of the old pieces of the old tabernacle are stored in a basement or lower precinct under the temple, where they will remain until the Babylonians, hundreds of years even afterward, destroy all of it. And the Ark of the Covenant will not be found. There are many theories on what happened to the Ark of the Covenant after the death of Solomon. Did Solomon give it to the son of his friend, the Queen of Sheba, to take down to Ethiopia to hide for them because he feels like trouble is coming? That's a big theory. Everyone in Ethiopia believes it, I can tell you. And they've got it there now, they claim. And in a special temple, on an island, in a lake, on top of a mountain. And only the Ethiopian Coptic Christian priests are able to attend to it. That's the Ark of the Covenant. Other theories are that the Egyptians, after Solomon died, 5 years after Solomon died, the Pharaoh Shishak came and plundered Jerusalem and took the Ark of the Covenant with all the other gold and silver of the temple, took it to Egypt, where it was buried in a special chamber and remained there until Indiana Jones found it and rescued it from the Nazis in that movie. And of course, there's another theory that the Ark of the Covenant was actually placed below the temple in a special vault where it still is today, except that, and imaginative Christian preachers will bring this out, that it's actually buried under the mount that they called Calvary. And the blood of Jesus dripped down and fell upon it, down under the earth. Well, that's poetic, entirely unprovable so far, but all of that was happening. Okay, here's Solomon's temple. By the time it takes 4 years to prepare and then 20 years to build the temple and all of the palatial buildings, governmental and church buildings for the city of Jerusalem. Expanding the city, rebuilding walls around the city. Takes a full 24 years. Solomon now, after he dedicates the temple, he's got 16 more years to live. He does not know this, but he might guess it. Since God had given Saul 40 years, he had given David 40 years to reign. And Solomon has now reigned 24 years and fulfilled what David told him to do. And he's guessing he's got 16 more years to live, and he looks at his son Rehoboam. And this guy is an idiot. And Solomon realizes, I didn't have to do all that building the first 24 years of my reign. I could have put that off and spent more time building my son Rehoboam. And it's too late now. Rehoboam is a fool. And as soon as Solomon dies, Rehoboam is king. Seems like Solomon spent the last several years of his life trying to write proverbs and letters to Rehoboam to teach him wisdom. All of that was ignored by Rehoboam. And as soon as his father Solomon is dead, Rehoboam gets himself crowned king of Israel in Jerusalem. Great. Except nobody shows up for the coronation. Only the elders of Judah. Nobody from Shechem or Manasseh or Ephraim. Nobody from any of the other northern states of Israel. None of them show up for Rehoboam's coronation. And so what does Rehoboam do after about a week, or probably 40 days after the days of his father's mourning are accomplished, mourning for his father? Rehoboam says, well, I'm going to do what Grandpa David did. I'll have 2 coronations. I've already been crowned here in Jerusalem. Now I'm going to go up to Shechem and have them crown me there. And I'll set up a throne on a platform, and we'll call the elders of the 10 tribes to come, and I'll demand that they crown me. And he's now going into northern Israel. What Rehoboam does not know is that they've already chosen their own king, but have not yet announced it. Solomon had suspected it. This guy, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Solomon's last recorded act before he died was to launch a search for this guy, Jeroboam, and have him arrested. And probably his father, Nebat, also, and probably their prophet, their propagandist who's been going around the north promoting their scheme to take over the kingdom. This guy's name was Ahijah the Shilohite or Shilonite. And Solomon probably wants the 3 of them arrested and brought to trial for rabble-rousing and raising a tyranny against the kingdom of Israel. Solomon does not catch Ahijah or Nebat or Jeroboam. Solomon dies. But what we have learned in reading the end of 1 Kings chapter 11 is that Jeroboam escaped and went, guess where? To Egypt. There's a new Pharaoh in Egypt. His name is Shishak, the usurper. And he had taken over the kingdom of Egypt from Solomon's old friend and father-in-law. For Solomon had married the old Pharaoh's daughter, back in 1 Kings chapter 4. And that was Pharaoh Susanes, we think. But Susanes is dead, and the new usurper, Shishak, is taken over. And Shishak welcomes Jeroboam into Egypt. And he remains there for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, until Solomon is dead. And then Jeroboam, probably helped by the Pharaoh's ships and by the men of Tyre, to go up the coast of the Mediterranean and get into Israel from the north so he wouldn't come through Jerusalem and be arrested. And he goes around and then comes down to Shechem. And he is waiting there. And he has already gathered his followers. When Jeroboam becomes their leader, they haven't announced it, but they're ready to. Now here comes Rehoboam up to Shechem to get himself crowned. And to his surprise, not only the elders of the 10 tribes, but from below the hills come virtually all the men of northern Israel in their hundreds of thousands. And they gather there. You can imagine Rehoboam on his platform looking at these people coming. And they gather all before him. And Rehoboam and his workers would have raised their hands, and say, "This is the king of Israel, Rehoboam, son of Solomon, son of David." And they respond in silence. And then one man rides forth from the middle of all of them and takes the hood off of his face. And it is none other than Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And they've all decided for him to be their spokesperson, speaking to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And Jeroboam rides up to the edge of the platform, as we might imagine it, and puts his hands up and says, "O son of Solomon, son of David, O King Rehoboam, king of Judah, the people of Israel will be willing to serve you if you will be their servant. And what is it you want? Your father Solomon taxed us very heavily. All of his temple and buildings and this highway cutting through our country, it was all built for the sake of Judah. None of its benefits did any good for our tribes in the north. Instead, your father Solomon took our boys away from our farms and put them sailing on his ships, and many of them have never returned yet. And we've gotten no benefits, and yet we've paid taxes and paid taxes and paid taxes. All we're asking is that you will reduce the taxes for these people of the 10 northern tribes. You don't have to stop them altogether, just reduce them. That's all Jeroboam asked for. And Rehoboam says, "Well, I'm going to have to go home to Jerusalem and consult with my old taxman Adoniram and see what we can afford to do. I'll be back in 3 days." And they let him go without laughter, without belligerence. Rehoboam and his entourage ride back to Jerusalem. He arrives at night and he meets with his father's old Senate, Solomon's council. At least 12 members, as I can read it, were on that council. Maybe more. There's two groups of lists of Solomon's most trusted servants. But they talk with Rehoboam and they say, "Here's what you're going to have to do. You go back in 3 days and tell them, look, and bring them gifts. We got gifts in the treasury you can take to each one of the 10 tribal leaders in the north. Take gifts to them, bless them, and tell them that yes, we will reduce taxes for their people. And we're telling you, Rehoboam, Prince Rehoboam, King Rehoboam of Judah, if you will do this to them and show them that you are their servant, then they will serve you." And Rehoboam basically looks at all those old men who had been Solomon's counselors. Some of them had been David's counselors at some point in David's life. And Rehoboam looks at those old men that night in the council chamber and says, "Get the blankety blank out of here, you're all fired." And he runs them off. And Rehoboam brings in a new group of people, the young Judean hotheads that he had gone to school with, the young men who were brought up with him. And that night he appoints them as the new Senate and council. And he says, "What shall I do?" And they say, "Here's what you do." What those old men don't understand is that the times, they are a-changing. It's not like it was back in your daddy's times. These are new times, and it's time for you to be tough. You go tell them that you, Rehoboam, your little finger is going to be thicker than your father's whole belly was in terms of taking up taxes. And if they felt that your daddy, Solomon, chastised them with whips, you tell them you're going to use bigger whips and put scorpion stingers in them. And you'll chastise them with that, and they better watch out. They better not cry. They better be good. We're telling you why. Rehoboam the king is coming to town. You let them know that. Well, Rehoboam gets back and makes that very speech at Shechem. And at that moment, they were expecting that. They rose up in a loud howl that shook the stars in the skies. And they said then, Israel and Judah is no more and never will be again. What have we to do with the house of David? And it's probably Jeroboam screaming this out. He cries, get you to your tents, O men of Israel. We have nothing to do with the house of David. And at that moment the nation splits, and all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put Israel back together again. It's over with. Rehoboam barely escapes with his life, but not before he pushes the old man, Adoniram, who had been David's chief treasurer and Solomon's chief treasurer. So this is an old man, Adoniram. And he pushes him forward and said, you demand that these 10 tribal elders come up and pay their taxes to the kingdom. And while the old man is fumbling the way I can best imagine it, Rehoboam, coward that he is, sneaks out behind the back curtain, gets in his chariot, and is long gone. As the tribal people come up and pull old Adoniram, probably by his ankles, off of that platform, and they stone him to death. One version says they rode their horses over him again and again. That honorable old man who had conducted all the financing for building the temple and so forth. This is what they did to him. And Rehoboam barely escaped with his life. Rehoboam comes back to Jerusalem, and he tries to raise an army of 180,000 men from the men of Judah and from the remnants of Benjamin, which is still faithful to Judah, of course. He gets them together, but a wise prophet says, if you try to do that, you'll all be wiped out. Jeroboam's got 10 angry tribes with him, and they're all angry at you. Don't do it. That prophet was Shemaiah. I won't go into speculation about who he was and why he stopped Rehoboam from marching up to the north and destroying them. But he did say a strange thing that I wonder about. This prophet Shemaiah says, for this thing is of the Lord. It is God who has raised up Jeroboam. Now, I wonder about that. Somebody says, well, don't you think that every prophecy in the Bible is from God? And I'll say, no, I do not. The Bible itself says there are some false prophets who have said things in the Bible. And I read at what Jeroboam now begins to do up there in these northern tribes. And I wonder how in the world can Shemaiah, the so-called prophet, say that this was of God. Because what Jeroboam does, he establishes 4 capitals. He had been in Egypt with Pharaoh Shishak for a few years, and he had learned from Shishak about how to usurp a kingdom. Shishak had just done it in Egypt. And he learns all of the arts and skills of kingdom destroying. And he has come back and shown that as soon as Solomon's dead and the weak Rehoboam's on the throne, this is the moment to move. But he also learns from Egypt that what you got to do is get rid of Jehovah. You got to get rid of the God whose worship unites those 12 tribes in Israel. Get rid of him. Let the other country, Judah and Benjamin, keep him as their God. But if all of the 10 tribes of northern Israel still worship that God Jehovah, I can just hear the upstart Pharaoh teaching this to Jeroboam. If you don't get rid of that Jehovah, then eventually, if they're all still worshiping him in their hearts, eventually they'll be going back down to Jerusalem no matter what you say. And we've got this in a couple of chapters explaining it all. Well, what God should we present? And Pharaoh Shishak says, why not one of our main gods? What about the god Hapis, Hapis, the golden calf? And Jeroboam says, good idea. Can we get 2 of those made? And he gets 2 golden calves from Egypt and has them shipped in. And he puts one at Bethel up in the north of his domain, and the other at Bethel in the south, and the other at Dan in the north. And he says, now, our people don't have to go to Jerusalem to worship. We give them 2 temples to worship at, 2 altars they can worship at. They can go to whichever one's near to them, Dan or Bethel. And Jeroboam even got priests, not Levite priests. He hired men to be priests. Anyone who would give a couple of cows could say to Jeroboam, can I be made a priest? Yeah, sure. Bring your brother-in-law too if he's got a couple of cows to give. We'll make them all priests. And their job was to stop men on the north-south highway. Because Jeroboam says, the feasts are coming up in Jerusalem. And these people have been inclined to go down to the feasts. We've got to stop travelers on the road and say, oh, you men of Israel, why go to Jerusalem to celebrate the feasts? You can go to Dan or you can go to Bethel and do it. And that's the north-south axis, those 2 cities, Dan and Bethel. Jeroboam's evil genius goes further. He puts an east-west axis. Shechem and Shiloh. No, Shiloh's out. He gets rid of Shiloh. Shechem and, I forget which the other city was. I'll look it up. But he's got this north, south, east, west axis, and he keeps the people from going back down to Jerusalem. Takes a few years, but he finally outlaws the worship of Jehovah up in the 10 northern tribes. It becomes a criminal offense, apparently, and some few escape from the tribe of Asher, just a few families. Strangely, a few from Manasseh escape, and they go down to Jerusalem. But it takes a while, and for them to even be recognized down there. It won't be until Rehoboam is dead and Jeroboam decides to attack Judah, and I've taught this story, that his son Abijam raises an army of Judahites and Benjamites, and they withstand Jeroboam and drive him back into the north. And Jeroboam dies thereafter. But the 2 countries, Judah with Benjamin and the 10 tribes of the north, are never reunited. From then on, for the next few centuries, all kings of Judah are direct descendants of David. No king of northern Israel descends from David. There's a continual succession of the hereditary kingship in the south, down in Judah at Jerusalem. There is no such succession in the north. Sometimes a king in the north, like Jeroboam, his son and his grandson will reign, and then somebody will come in and kill the grandson and assassinate him and become king again. The prophets, like Elijah and Elisha, are sent to these kings in the north to try to call them to reform, but there's like 14 different dynasties of them. They come and go. Nearly all of them become king by assassination and usurpation. And it is a mess, and it never gets cleaned up. And that is the big problem. By the year 722 BC, they're all destroyed. As any, recognizable politic of, nation or tribe or group. They're scattered to the four winds. They are gone. Now this, and I've got just over 10 minutes to get back to Amos. But these are the atrocities that Amos is going to be talking about. His longest diatribe against northern Israel, or a diatribe of any of the others. He spent 2 verses saying, for 3 transgressions of Judah, yea, for 4, God's going to punish Judah. Will not turn back the punishment of it. And he said it for Tyre, and he said it for Philistia, and so forth. But when he starts talking about northern Israel, he's going to go on for a couple of chapters. And I've already read to you. He says, here's the kinds of things you've done. You're a bunch of perverts. You've destroyed the poor. I'm back in Amos chapter 2. You've turned aside the way of the meek. You've gone to every altar. Now God begins to complain through Amos to the people of northern Israel. He says in verse 9 of Amos chapter 2, he says, yet didn't I destroy the Amorites from before them, Israel, whose height was like the height of the cedars and strong as the oaks, yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and seems to be saying I plucked up his roots from beneath. God says I came in and destroyed a race of giants for you people to come in under Joshua and possess the land. I did that for you. Verse 10, also I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and I led you for 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the gigantic Amorites. And I raised up your sons to make them prophets. I raised up your young men to make them holy Nazarites. Is it not even thus, O ye children of Israel, saith the Lord? But what did you do? Any of them wanted to become Nazarites. A Nazarite has a vow never to drink wine, That's one of the 5 Nazarite vows. You gave the Nazarites wine to drink. And you commanded the prophets, commanding them, prophesy not. Behold, this is God talking to them. It says, I am pressed under you as a cart is pressed that is full of sheaves. I feel like I've been pulling an unduly loaded burden, trying to pull you Israelites through history. You have just weighed me down, and I don't feel like pulling you anymore. Therefore, the flight shall perish from the swift. The strong shall not strengthen his force, neither shall the mighty among you Israelites deliver himself. Neither shall he stand that handles the bow. And he who is swift of foot shall not deliver himself. neither shall he that rides the horse deliver himself. And he who is courageous among the mighty shall flee away naked in that day, saith the Lord. Now he's going to go on, still talking about northern Israel. We'll look at some of it. I don't want to read every single verse in Amos, but I just wanted you to see the world that Amos is rebuking. And more than any of them, he's rebuking his own region, northern Israel. Now, it is said, I'm going to stop in just a minute. I've about said all I'm able to say for the night. But I've told you that all of the kings down south in Judah were direct lineage descendants of David. Father, son, grandson, on and on. But in the north, they were all assassins or the sons of assassins who reigned over the north. Something else I want to point out about that to you. Not all of the kings of Judah were good men. A few of them were. Rehoboam was not. Abijah was not good. We're told that he did evil in the sight of the Lord all his days. Then comes Asa. Asa was pretty good. And then comes Jehoshaphat. He's pretty good, but his son is not. Finally, we get Uzziah, and then we get Hezekiah. But Hezekiah's son, these are all descended from David. Hezekiah's son Manasseh becomes the wickedest king in the entire Bible. But then a few generations later, we get Josiah. But Josiah turns out to be the last good king. So there's really only 5 creditable kings after the life of David and Solomon to reign in Jerusalem. The rest of them were stinkers, okay? But in the north, there's not one single good one. And what it is said throughout the kings is that this guy was king and reigned for so many years, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord all the days of his life. And then what does it say? For each and every one of them. For he followed in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. Now it is that legacy of Jeroboam that Israel has kept up. Evil, 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 northern Israel. They have kept it up and repeated it all and continued in it. And that is what Amos is talking about. He is speaking to that generation, what they in those days called Israel, and it was blasphemous and evil for them to call their country Israel, because that name Israel had been given to Jacob, who had wrestled with God for the blessing. These people had repudiated God. Jacob had held the foot of God and said, I can't live or let you go until you bless me. These people had thrown God away. How dare they call themselves Israel? So there's no holy name of Israel attached to the land. We have this discussion sometimes. It's attached to a kind of people who embrace God. That's what Israel really means. I'm glad to call the modern nation of Israel, Israel. I'm all for it. I applaud it. But they've got to come to a realization, many of them, that they need to be the children of God and not just the children of Jacob renamed again. So Amos is hard to read if you consider these terms. But it's there in your Bible. Some of those old rabbis chose Amos's 9 chapters and said, That's got to go in there. People better not forget this. And so there it is. We'll look at a little more of it. Then we've got a little story in Amos where, he has to prove his right to be a prophet, and he tells us a little more. Not only was he among the herdsmen of Tekoa, but he was also a gatherer of sycamore fruits. And he'll talk about that, and he'll tell us in a story that's very similar to Isaiah's story, his calling narrative. I was gathering sycamore fruits, and the Lord called me. Isaiah will later say it was on the year King Uzziah died that I saw the Lord, and he visited me and spoke to me and said, whom shall I send? And Isaiah said, here am I, Lord, send me. Very similar narrative Amos will relate concerning his own calling from God, which is going to be very interesting. Well, all right. What a happy talk I've given tonight, huh? Yeah. But, the Bible is mostly about this one nation, Israel, Judah, and so forth. It focuses in on them, not so much any other nations. Maybe the whole purpose of that is and I closed last week saying something similar to this. Maybe the whole thing is God is showing us in His book, the Bible. Look at a people. How I loved them, how they failed me, how I yet want to redeem them. Do any of you, other nations, think you are better people? And I'll deal with you in the same ways as I deal with these. And to me, that's the beauty of the Bible, that God is giving us an example of how He wants to deal with all peoples. You go back to Genesis chapter 10, and there's the table of nations. Why are they even mentioned? When we say farewell to Cain, God says, not yet. Here's a list of his descendants. Why do we need to know them? When we say farewell to Ishmael, there's a list of his descendants. Bye-bye, Ishi. Bye-bye. We don't need to read about you anymore. God says, nope, here's his descendants. When Esau moves out of the story and we're going to follow Jacob from now on, God says, not so fast. An entire chapter. These are the descendants of Esau. It's God's way of saying all these other people do matter. They matter. They matter to me. Call them Gentiles, call them hound dogs. Have Elvis sing to them. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Whatever you want to call them. The goyim, the dogs. But I made them. And if I loved Adam, I'm going to love them too. And if I'm looking for redemption with Israel, I'll also look for redemption with any of you others. Thank you. God bless you.